The president and Secretary Clinton both call out Bernie Sanders on guns. This could be the Democratic issue. Let's put hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in Washington. Secretary Clinton is on the line right now from California to respond to what President Obama has said about denying his presidential endorsement to anyone, any candidate who refuses to support what he calls common sense gun reforms. His spokesman, Josh Earnest, suggested this afternoon that this condition could apply to Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. Here's what the president wrote in his op-ed in today's New York Times. Even as I continue to take every action possible as president, I will also take every action I can as a citizen. I will not campaign for, vote for, or support any candidate, even in my own party, who does not support common sense gun reform. And if the 90% of Americans who do support common sense gun reform join me, we will elect the leadership we deserve, close quote. Well, that seemed to be a clear swipe at Bernie Sanders. And here's what presidential press spokesman Josh Earnest said today when asked about that.
I certainly noticed that Senator Sanders told one of your colleagues/competitors here when asked this very question. He was eager to point out that Senator Sanders had made clear that he was willing to revisit that position. That's exactly the goal here, right? We want people to change their minds. We want members of Congress to start taking different positions. So, again, I'm not familiar with Senator Sanders' record, so maybe this is something that he said on many previous occasions. But if not, I'm ready to start taking some credit for changing some minds on Capitol Hill. Well, again, as I just acknowledged, I'm not familiar with the ins and outs of his record. But if Democratic voters across the country confirm that he is the Democratic nominee, then I'm confident that we're going to spend some time here learning about his record and learning about what is on his agenda to make that decision.
I'm joined right now on the telephone by Secretary Hillary Clinton. Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us. What is the issue here between yourself and Senator Sanders?
I think it's pretty much what the president has said, Chris. He has made a powerful statement about the urgent need to end the epidemic of gun violence in our country, and his new executive actions include steps that I've been advocating for throughout this campaign. And as he said, voters should not support any candidate who does not support common sense gun reform. We've got to get a handle and deal with the fact we're losing 90 people a day to gun violence. So the Democrats have a real choice here, and I think it's important for Democrats to know that 10 years ago, gun safety advocates wanted to make gun makers and sellers have to go to court to answer for their reckless disregard of human life. Because after all, if an auto company sells an unsafe car, you can sue them. Unsafe food, unsafe tools, unsafe toys. The makers can all be sued. So the NRA wrote this bill that said no one can sue a gun maker or a gun seller, and called it the most significant piece of pro-gun legislation in 20 years. And when it really mattered, Senator Sanders voted with the gun lobby, and I voted against the gun lobby. So this is a significant difference, and it's important that, maybe it's time for Senator Sanders to stand up and say, I got this one wrong. But he hasn't. He's defended his vote time and again. He said he would consider changes to the law, but, that was 3 months ago, and there's been no effort to introduce anything in the Congress or to stand with, those Democrats who want to repeal this, really irresponsible blanket immunity that was voted in for the gun makers and sellers.
Given all that's happened, Madam Secretary, in the last several months, the horror we've seen with these mass shootings, do you believe that gun safety reform is a central issue of 2016?
Absolutely, Chris. I totally agree with what President Obama has said. Guns should be a central voting issue. I have been speaking out about it throughout this campaign, certainly have used my debate appearances to make that case. And I think Senator Sanders has been wrong on gun safety, and he's wrong on the fact that this is the leading cause of death for young people in our country, particularly young African-American men. So it represents a very clear choice in the Democratic primary.
Let me ask you about you mentioned the first debate when you did go through a list of items in which you disagreed with his position on gun safety questions. Do you want to go through that list again? There is a pattern here, I believe you're arguing.
Well, there is, because Senator Sanders voted 5 times against the Brady bill. 5 times. And it has been the principal instrument for us keeping more than 2 million guns out of the hands of fugitives, felons, stalkers, the people who should not have them in the first place. He voted against closing loopholes. In fact, he voted for what we call the Charleston loophole, which is what enabled the killer in Charleston to get a gun after 3 days, even though the background check had not been completed. And as the NRA itself has said, he voted for their most important priority in 20 years, namely giving immunity from liability to makers and sellers. So this is a pattern, and it's a pattern that I have been calling out, voting for guns on Amtrak and all the rest of it, because we've got to, as a nation, really stand up for common sense gun safety measures. And the fact is, Chris, that a very big majority of Americans and even a majority of gun owners support the platform that I have been advocating for and support the executive actions that the president has outlined.
Well, here's Senator Sanders, Madam Secretary, telling my colleague Andrea Mitchell today that he does support President Obama's executive action on gun safety. Here's Senator Sanders.
You know, there are a lot of candidates running in the House and the Senate who may be opposed to sensible gun control legislation. I happen not to be one of them. I strongly support the executive order that the president is working on right now.
Well, there he is. What do you make of that defense? He says he's in line with the president, and he's not one that the president's talking about. He's not one of those who opposes common sense gun reforms.
Well, that's at variance with his record. You know, Senator Sanders and I have some differences on policy. He's pointed out some of those from his perspective this week. And today I'm taking this opportunity to comment in light of the president's remarks about our differences on guns. And my record is very clear on prevention. I've been calling for strong efforts to fight gun violence throughout this campaign. I'll keep fighting on this issue because I have met too many of the family members of victims of gun violence now, you know, going back to my time as First Lady, as Senator on this campaign trail, and we've just seen too many gun deaths, and we can't afford to wait. And I've raised this issue before, standing next to Senator Sanders. He's refused to give a straight answer. He could today introduce legislation to repeal the immunity that was given to gun makers and sellers. I hope he will join me and the president in supporting real change, and that's what I'm looking for.
Madam Secretary, I believe he said he will not change his mind on that point. But thank you so much for calling into the program tonight. Secretary Clinton, thank you for joining us. Sam Stein is with the Huffington Post, and he's an MSNBC contributor, of course. And Time Magazine's J. Newton Small is the author of a great new book, Broad Influence. It's about women, and a little play on words there. But let's talk about that. The fact that the Secretary is joining this debate right now at a heated moment after the president writes a piece in the New York Times, after Josh Earnest basically points it a bit in the direction of Bernie Sanders, to put it lightly. And there she is. I think it's good timing for her to come on the program and make the point. But go ahead.
Well, I guess I was struck at how motivating an issue this has become for the Democratic Party. We associate gun politics as an incredibly motivating issue for the right.
Isn't it a progressive cause?
It is gradually, if not gradually, quickly become a progressive cause in light of this repeated instances of mass shootings, or high-profile shootings, if you want to use that phraseology. And for her to be so aggressive in pointing out what are actual differences, there are substantive differences, but the manner in which she went after him, which has been more aggressive than on any other topic, suggests that her campaign realizes, too, that this is an incredibly motivating issue for the progressive base.
You know, one of the rules of politics I've learned along the way, and I like to keep the list up to date, is go where your opponent can't can't go. And go where you believe, of course, in the policy, but go to the policies he or she can't abide by.
Yeah.
It is Vermont. Is the issue of gun rights, Second Amendment rights, such a hot issue among the traditional, not the Ben and Jerry's Democrats up there, but the people who have been living up there for years? You can't mess with the gun owners. Is that why she's going after? Because he can't change his mind. He says he won't change his mind. He's going to keep the immunity for the manufacturers of guns.
And that's interesting because, you know, it's not so much of a Democratic, liberal, progressive issue as it used to be rural versus urban issues, right? And there are a lot of rural Democrats like Bernie Sanders who do support the NRA, who do support gun rights. And it's interesting that she's pushing this so hard because New Hampshire is one of the states that does really support gun rights. Yeah. But she's clearly making the bet that by pushing it this hard, she's going to get Democratic votes for it.
And she's trying to. We'll see how it works in Iowa and New Hampshire. You're right; they're not the easiest states to go for the gun issue. But nationally, I think it's a winner among Democrats. Anyway, thank you, Sam Stein. Thank you, Jay Newton-Small, and thank you, Secretary Clinton. Coming up,
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.